Okay, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're navigating a topic that's, well, it's difficult and really significant. We're talking about the history and the continuing reality of population control. Specifically, we're focusing on eugenics and forced sterilizations, drawing from a collection of articles that really dig into this.
And it's crucial as we get into these sources to just state up front, this is disturbing material, very sensitive.
Definitely.
Eugenics, forced sterilizations, these are huge violations of human rights, Makes you confront some really uncomfortable questions.
About power, discrimination,
Yeah,
and what society values.
exactly.
So our mission here, just to be clear, isn't to give our own opinions. We're here to carefully pull out the key historical facts, the insights from these articles. We want to trace how eugenics started, how it was actually put into practice in different places, who was targeted.
And the horrifying links to some major atrocities, right? Things that sadly have echoes even today.
Right. So the goal is to give you, our listener, a clear, solid understanding based on these sources. Okay, so let's unpack the origins. Where do the articles say this all began?
Well, the narrative in these articles really starts with evolutionary theory, Charles Darwin's work. But it was his cousin, Francis Galton, who took those ideas in a very specific and, as we now know, deeply flawed direction.
And he coined the term eugenics back in 1883, according to the sources.
Yes, 1883. And it's fascinating and pretty alarming how quickly a scientific concept got twisted into social engineering.
So what was the basic idea of Galton's eugenics?
The core belief, as the articles lay it out, was that you could improve humanity by stopping certain people from reproducing, people with so-called bad genes, and at the same time encouraging reproduction among those thought to have good genes.
So active manipulation of who gets to have children.
Pretty much, based on a really simplistic and just wrong understanding of how heredity works.
And the articles stress how fast this caught on, right? In Europe, America.
Incredibly fast. It gained support from, well, all sorts of people, scientists, politicians, even big philanthropists.
Yeah, the sources named John D. Rockefeller Jr., the Carnegie Institution. They actually funded this stuff.
They did. And influential figures, too, like John Harvey Kellogg, the cereal guy, believe it or not, Theodore Roosevelt.
Even Margaret Sanger, who's obviously known for birth control advocacy, the articles say she supported some eugenic ideas. It's jarring. Why was it so popular?
That's a really good question. The articles suggest it tapped into this belief, common at the time, that society could be perfected through science. Eugenics seemed to offer a scientific fix for really complex problems, poverty, crime, disease, by claiming they were mainly inherited, which is, of course, a flawed premise.
And this wasn't just talk, right? It led to actual institutions.
Absolutely. Eugenics departments popped up in universities. And then there was the Eugenics Record Office, the ERO, in America.
Funded by those big names again.
Right. And their job was to collect detailed family histories to figure out who was supposedly fit to marry and have kids based on their ancestry.
The articles even mention eugenics marriage certificates. It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
It really does. Almost surreal.
So based on these ideas, who did they actually label unfit in America? What puts you in that category?
The lists detailed in the articles are just incredibly broad and discriminatory. They really reflect the prejudices of the time, not science. You had people labeled as criminals, the deaf, the blind, people called drunkards, poor people.
People with mental illness, physical disabilities, paralysis.
Even conditions like autism and epilepsy. And being born out of wedlock, a bastard, as the sources note the term used then, or being an unmarried mother could get you labeled socially unfit.
And the justification, according to the sources, was always preventing the spread of these bad genes, right? For disease, poverty, crime.
Yes, that was the stated rationale. But it wasn't just about managing the population already here, was it?
No, the article's definitely connected to immigration policy, too.
Exactly. The American eugenics movement aimed to do two things. Stop the unfit inside the U.S. from reproducing, and stop similar people from immigrating into the U.S.
And this wasn't just theory. It led to actual laws. Like in Indiana in 1907, the articles flagged that one.
Yeah, Indiana was the first state to actually legalize forced sterilization of inmates in institutions. And the articles show that this opened the floodgates. 31 other states followed suit with similar laws.
And they expanded it beyond prisons.
Oh, yes. To people in mental homes, and even, tragically, autistic individuals were included under these laws in some states.
And then things took an even darker turn in the 1920s. According to the sources, the focus shifted.
It did. The articles detail this really disturbing shift towards targeting racial minorities for sterilization.
Who specifically?
Immigrants from Italy, Eastern and Southern Europe, Latinos, Asians, these groups were falsely labeled as being, more likely to be criminals or drunkards. Pure prejudice.
And this tied into immigration law again.
Directly. The Federal Immigration Act of 1924. The articles point out its quota system was heavily influenced by these eugenic ideas, trying to limit people from nations deemed inferior.
And the courts went along with this initially, the Supreme Court.
In the early days, yes. The articles state the Supreme Court actually upheld the constitutionality of these state sterilization laws.
Which must have emboldened the states.
Absolutely. It gave them legal cover. And this paved the way for, well, the horrific reality that Black, Latino, and Native American people were disproportionately targeted, often in secret.
Secret sterilizations.
Yeah.
That's chilling. The sources describe procedures done without consent, without knowledge.
Exactly. Sometimes when people were vulnerable during childbirth or even when they went in for minor, completely unrelated issues.
And California is highlighted as a particularly bad state for this.
California was definitely a leader, unfortunately, in implementing these policies. The numbers there were very high.
And it's crucial to understand, as the articles stress, this isn't just ancient history.
Not at all. Forced sterilizations continued. The articles mention that by December 2020, over 40 women had come forward testifying about invasive procedures while they were in ICE custody.
In ICE custody, recently.
Yes. And there are ongoing concerns, also mentioned in the sources, about immigrants in detention facilities, particularly in Georgia, being sterilized.
And the case of Kelly Dillon, forcibly sterilized in a California prison in 2001. The articles use her story as a stark, modern example.
It really brings it home that this has contemporary victims. It's not just something from the history books.
The scale is just staggering. What are the estimates mentioned?
The articles cite figures ranging from 60,000 up to possibly 150,000 people forcibly or deceptively sterilized in the U.S. just during the 20th century.
And unbelievably, the sources say many states still had these laws on the books recently.
As of the time the articles were written, yes. 31 states and D.C. still technically had forced sterilization laws, and there were even isolated recent cases of court-ordered sterilization tied to plea deals and child support cases.
It's incredible. There's mention of some states, starting with California, beginning to offer compensation.
Yes, a very recent development, moving towards compensating victims. It's a small step, maybe, but the damage is obviously immense and lasting.
Okay, let's shift focus now to the global picture. The articles make it clear this wasn't just a U.S. domestic issue. Population control was an export too.
That's a really key point in the sources, yes. Population control was U.S. government policy, both at home and abroad. From the 1960s onwards, agencies like USAID and organizations like the World Bank were sponsoring programs overseas that included free or subsidized sterilizations.
And there was this book, The Population Bomb, by the Ehrlichs in 1968. The articles point to its influence.
Huge influence. It predicted mass starvation, extinction even, if population growth wasn't curbed. The articles argue this book created a climate of fear that, well, unfortunately helped push governments worldwide towards coercive population control policies.
Even though, as the articles note, those dire predictions didn't actually happen.
Largely, no. And the Ehrlichs later acknowledged some flaws, revised some views, but the damage from that initial wave of fear was done.
So where did these policies take root globally? India is mentioned prominently.
India is a major example in the articles, starting back in 1951, but it really escalated during Prime Minister Indira Gandhi's emergency period in the 70s.
With international funding.
Yes, supported by loans and aid from the World Bank, the Swedish International Development Authority, the UN Population Fund. They implemented this massive program, first targeting men. Millions were forcibly sterilized. Then the focus shifted more towards women.
The numbers are mind-boggling. One source mentions 6.2 million Indian men sterilized in 1 year.
Yes, far exceeding the number sterilized under the Nazis. And these weren't safe procedures often. Many people died or had serious complications.
And the articles say these sterilization camps were still operating in India as recently as 2022, targeting the poor and minorities.
Despite a Supreme Court ruling against them, yes. Reports indicate they persisted, targeting vulnerable groups. Shocking.
Then there's China's one-child policy.
Right, from the 70s up to 2016. The articles document forced abortions and sterilizations for couples who had more than one child. And they particularly highlight the impact on ethnic minorities, like the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. Reports of mass forced sterilizations happening in concentration camps there. deeply concerning human rights issues.
The articles also mention Puerto Rico, a campaign linking poverty and fertility.
Yes, leading to about 34% of women of childbearing age being sterilized by 1965, a staggering number.
And Greenland, Inuit women having IUDs inserted without consent.
That was a Danish government campaign running for decades, from the 20s to the 70s. Thousands of Inuit women affected without their knowledge or consent. A terrible violation.
Peru, too, in the 90s.
Yes, a program targeting indigenous people and the poor, funded by USAID, the Nippon Foundation, UNFPA. The articles even mentioned the WHO initially congratulated Peru for it.
It's hard to believe.
Misguided praise, certainly.
And the list in the articles goes on. Singapore using financial incentives, Czechoslovakia targeting Romani women.
Also, Colombia, Sweden targeting disabled people, minorities, the uneducated, even those deemed promiscuous, Uzbekistan.
And reports mentioned of forced sterilization of HIV-positive women in Mexico, Kenya, South Africa.
Yes, the case of Bonji Kilimsibi in South Africa, sterilized without consent after childbirth, is mentioned as an example of this ongoing abuse.
Now, a really critical connection the articles make is between eugenics and major historical atrocities, the Armenian genocide, for instance.
Yes, the articles explain how eugenics provided a kind of pseudo-intellectual justification. Controlling the Armenian population within the Ottoman Empire was a motive. The genocide involved systematic destruction, mass murder during death marches, forced conversions, partly fueled by this ideology.
In the Nazi Germany and the Holocaust, the link there seems undeniable based on the sources.
Absolutely central. The articles point out Hitler himself explicitly referenced American eugenics in Mein Kampf to justify his racial purification ideas.
The Nazi euthanasia program
Was a direct application of eugenics, targeting people with mental and physical disabilities. And Himmler, head of the SS, used these ideas to systematically persecute Jews, political opponents, Roma, gay people, others deemed misfit, sending them to concentration camps.
It's chilling that the articles mention Nazi defendants at the Nuremberg trials actually pointed to U.S. eugenics laws to try and justify their actions.
It really highlights the danger of these ideas, how they can be twisted to justify the absolute worst cruelty.
The Nuremberg race laws in 1935, stripping Jewish citizenship, Kristallnacht.
All steps leading to the final solution. The articles detail the establishment of camps like Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz, the extermination camps.
The horrific medical experiments by Mengele.
Yes, using prisoners for inhumane experiments, and then the industrialized murder, the gas chambers, the crematoria.
The death toll mentioned. 6 million Jews, 11 million people overall. It's almost impossible to comprehend.
The ultimate terrible endpoint of eugenics put into practice.
So, the articles note that after World War II, when the full extent of Nazi horrors came out, eugenics as an open, accepted science declined.
Thankfully, yes. The overt ideology lost credibility. Seeing where it led in Nazi Germany was a major factor.
But as we've discussed, the practices didn't entirely stop.
No. As the articles make very clear, forced sterilizations continued in many places, often targeting vulnerable groups. The Tuskegee syphilis study is mentioned as another example of unethical treatment during that broader period, showing how vulnerable populations could be exploited in the name of science or public health.
So this history, disturbing as it is, definitely resonates with current debates about population control and human rights.
Without a doubt.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, let's quickly summarize the main takeaways from these articles.
Sure. We've seen the origins of eugenics, how it grew from a flawed interpretation of evolution,
How it spread and led to widespread forced sterilization policies in the U.S. and globally, targeting people based on prejudice, not science.
We've seen the undeniable link to atrocities like the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust.
And crucially, that these practices didn't just end after WWII. They've continued much more recently in various forms.
Right. Understanding this history, as the article suggests, is just vital if we want to recognize and prevent similar abuses happening again.
It really forces you, the listener, to think about the ethics of any kind of population control measure.
And how easily societies can slip into discriminatory practices when certain groups get labeled unfit or undesirable.
Yeah. It's worth reflecting on how these old, discredited ideas might still, maybe subtly, influence how we talk about social issues, health, and human rights today.
It's a sobering thought, but definitely an essential one to consider.